A non-military target hit that day. It's alleged that the Georgians continued firing, intentionally or not, on ordinary civilians.
Разбили. Посмотрите, какими снарядами они стреляли.
It's destroyed. Look at the shells they used. Clearly not machine gun. Look, they were large shells.
Видите? Видите, от какого крупнокалиберного они стреляли.
This was Marina Kochyeva's car. She alleges it was hit repeatedly by Georgian tank fire as she tried to flee Trinvali on the night of August the 9th. They crashed into a ditch, but the firing didn't stop.
Мы скатились туда.
My fellow passenger covered me with his body and he was hit. If he hadn't been hit, the bullet would have been for me.
You were driving fast and it was night time. Maybe they simply thought that you were fighters.
Знаете, как я хочу сказать, боевики идут туда,
Fighters go towards the fighting, and we were escaping. They knew that this road is a bypass and leads to the north. So they were lying in wait for people like me, people who were frightened, who were weak, who were fleeing the fighting. They didn't allow us that. Only thanks to God's help did we survive. But lots died on this road.
Ossetians wounded in the war were patched up in a makeshift underground hospital. The international investigative organisation Human Rights Watch now accuses Georgia of indiscriminate use of force in Trinvali, a violation of the Geneva Conventions. It believes it may also be guilty of deliberate targeting of civilians, a serious war crime. What does Georgia's ally, Britain, think of that?
On my visit to Tbilisi, of course I raised, at the highest level in Georgia, the questions that have been asked and raised about war crimes and other military actions by the Georgian authorities.
Russia puts it very simply. It says Georgia attacked a sleeping town.
Well, Georgia was attacked by people in that town of Skin Valley, and that is the tit for tat that I have talked about from the beginning.
There is another side to the story, and this is it. The wholesale destruction after the war of ethnic Georgian villages inside South Ossetia by Ossetian militia. Ossetians say the villages were used by the Georgian military, but this was plainly a family home. Its former occupants are now among the 16,000 Georgian refugees from South Ossetia sheltering on the other side of the dividing line. It's hard to believe that the Georgian family who lived here will ever be allowed to return. The destruction of this house and hundreds of others is a deliberate act of ethnic cleansing. In Trinvali, I met one of the perpetrators.
It was not cleansing. There wasn't any genocide of the Georgian people. No one was killed. They were given a corridor so that they could calmly get out of there. When they'd left their villages, their houses were burnt, so they didn't return. It's enough just to set light to the curtains and the whole house will flare up. If you ever want to burn someone's house, that's my advice. Simply set light to the curtains, and that's enough.
By the time those houses were burned, Russian troops had finally arrived in force, driving the Georgians out of South Ossetia. But the Russians failed to prevent the willful destruction of civilian property.
No, this is not ethnic cleansing. This was also the area of the war. The Georgians, when I say that the Georgians were moving their artillery and tanks closer to Tsinval, this also included the Georgian enclaves inside South Ossetia, where they secretly organized strongholds.
But we've talked, for example, to Ossetian militiamen who talked about how they burnt and destroyed those houses after the immediate conflict. Shouldn't Russia somehow have prevented that from happening?
Well, of course, when your city is attacked, when your loved ones, when your relatives, when your children, when your parents, brothers and sisters are being killed brutally, you can go emotional and you can go really in a very unwanted way.
But while Russia's forgiving of its Ossetian allies, has the West overlooked possible crimes by its Georgian partners?
The phrase tit for tat doesn't in some way, you don't think, diminish what appears to be at least partly indiscriminate action against civilians. Tit for tat implies fighters.
Well, tit for tat, military tit for tat, is people attacking each other and trying to kill each other. And so you may think that is not a serious description. I think it is a serious description. And at no stage have we belittled any of the suffering or the death that has been caused. What I think is important is that whatever the dispute between South Ossetians and Georgians, whatever the rights and wrongs of what each of them did, and I've talked at every stage about wrongs as well as rights, that does not justify one country invading another.
This is where my son was buried, here. He was killed on the 9th of August at about 10 a.m. We buried him on the 10th. They killed him.
Caught in the tit for tat, neither Taya nor her son Georgi were trying to kill anyone. And for her, the eventual arrival of the Russians meant she could finally emerge from the cellar to make a temporary grave for him here. An Ossetian view of the conflict is summed up by a neighbour who stops me as I leave.
I bow down before the great Russian people. Thank you for everything.
We don't know how many Ossetian civilians were killed in the fighting. Human Rights Watch estimates between 300 and 400. In Tskhinvali, that would be 1% of the population, the equivalent of 70,000 deaths in London. If many of them did die, as appears, from indiscriminate force, that's a war crime no less real for being committed by a firm ally of the West.
Tim Heal reporting. Well, earlier I talked with the president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, and began by asking him if he regretted the civilian deaths caused by Georgian troops.
Well, I regret every single death as a result of military hostilities. This was not a war of our choice. Whether it was 100 or as much as it was, even if it had been as one single person, it would have been very tragic for me, certainly. Certainly, I do regret it.
You personally took the decision to attack what we were told was a sleeping town, Tskhinvali. Civilian deaths were an inevitable part of your policy, were they not?
We took a decision, and we had basically no choice to protect our population from attacking and advancing Russian military equipment, from Russian-backed and basically Russian-trained, Russian-equipped and Russian-commanded militias, as well as regular Russian troops that invaded my country. We did something that any other democratic government would have done.